Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Jill Hammer here in the Beit Kohenet Mystics Room with Kohenet Angelique Rivera, aka Yah, an amazing priestess, human being, liberator of humanity. I know Yah as a poet, as a healer, as a liberation worker, as a dreamer, and in a number of other ways. And I'm excited, Yah, to have a conversation with you about your priestessing.
Yeah, so am I. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on and any opportunity to chill and just talk. I'm so down for it. So thank you for this.
So great. And yeah, as an ordained Kohenet, but long before you were an ordained Kohenet, you were already really exploring the priestess path. And I wanted to actually start. Maybe this is a place to start that I saw uh, online that you had posted a map of Boriken out of Puerto Rico, and on it was your town. And
Yeah.
I wondered if you would say something about that map and sort of your connection there.
Yeah. Actually, my kids and I talk often about this because my family was part of being established in a place that's it's the name I knew it by was Humacao, and it's the east side of the island. And it's also so there's like it's like a city town thing. So Humacao would be the city, and then if you have a small town, I come from La Piedras. My family comes from La Piedras, and it's a place known for our indigenous Taino relatives were poets and they were scholars and studiers of words. And for me, there's this. I was thinking about this the other day because I remember I'm originally from Brooklyn. I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania now. And as my mom took us to the island when I was a kid and tried to live there, I mean, she really tried to go back home. It was challenging. And one of the things that where there's like this constant theme is like being connected to the rootedness of our ancestry on the island, of our like our heritage, our culture. And so for me, there's this like my mom started somewhere with that, and trying to find home for her spirit, mind, and body. As a woman, her tone was darker than mine. And so when I look at Puerto Rico, my relationship to Borinquen, is what its indigenous name is.
Mm.
I look at kind of the intersection of rich narratives, right? While holding like this idea of like, I want to go back enough to know, but not back enough to stay. And what I mean by that is like, I know that I'm a generation that has to continue to evolve what this identity means. And we can't necessarily, I can't undo, right? Like, it's like, we're not, with the map you're speaking to is a map that's an old map that is operating by the Taino indigenous, like kind of names for the places on the island. And they were entirely different than what they are now, after Spanish, colonialism and things like that. And so looking back and going, well, actually, no, we have something to tap back to. I'm like, we do. It's a complex story, right? And it's challenging. But yeah, for me, that's really about, I think there's so many ways that you can look for home.
Mm. Mm.
And there's this tendency to go outside when you're looking for home rather than coming back inside,
Mhm.
because coming back inside requires you to face also the complexity of what that means, right? And where you are located in that relationship, because it changes. My location is different than my mother's location. My mother was born on the island. I wasn't. And so when I went back as a kid, I wasn't welcomed. I was ostracized for being a New Yorker. I was as if I wasn't the real deal, the real deal. I was like, they were like, "Oh, you're a gringa." I'm like, "You better watch your mouth." I'm like, watch your mouth. Because there's nothing, I'm like, this is my culture. So yeah, so for me, so much of that rootedness is like, I don't have to, assimilation requires us to abandon um our identities or even our curiosity around them for the sake of assimilating and not stirring the pot. And I just got to a place where I was like, I am all the things. I'm not leaving anything behind. And so much of that still for me rings when I go to the island. I was talking about this recently on a live on Instagram. I'm like, I love the island. I go home and I cry every time. And I'm not at the place of imagining a capacity for my life to literally be built there. And I live with that. I have to, it's like I like to dream about the perfect, but that's not my story yet. And so continuously cultivating my relationship to that aspect of my history and my identity for me is lifelong and changes on seasons.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
yeah.
Wow. It's really powerful to hear you talk about these woven threads, these ways that, there are so many pieces of, of us, of you, and you're,
Ah,
you're, bringing them together into relationship, which is powerful.
yeah. And being able to, excuse me, because I think some of that is we live in such a conditioning that demands, it's really about demanding legitimacy. Legitimacy is an ancient question. If this was the first time it's an ancient question. And so I feel like there's so much for ourselves, like so much conflict in how to land when we live in so many intersections. And so much of my own identity has been one of those where, like, I'm raised culturally Puerto Rican, right? Like, or New Yorican for specific contexting. And, being the person who returns to the roots of my family, to our Jewish roots, and the way those things intermingle, that indigeneity just intermingles, created so many different possibilities and also challenges. And so I feel like some of us, when we start waking up in particular ways and remembering who we are, experience a lot of tension around that. How do you how, how do you connect behind?
Mm-hmm.
Because to go forward, or whatever the um, idea is, it requires knowing where you came from.
Yes. Yes. I'm just deeply sitting with that.
Yeah.
Can you weave the priestess piece in for us? Like
Mhm.
how does that weave into this reclaiming and claiming and weaving?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing it back to that, because that was the beginning of the question. So here's the thing. When I came across what I call Kohenetville, when I came across Kohenet land, for me, I had already gone through so many dark moments of trying to understand what was this thing inside of me. Very clear that I'm called to do a thing and be a thing and be in a way. And I was blessed enough, and I talk about this tension a lot because there's a lot of story with my mother, shadow and light. But I was really, really blessed when it came to spirituality to have, like, my mother and I shared so deeply in that when I came into an understanding that I had a particular way of seeing the world and a particular way of engaging with the world, it was affirmed for me, so that the questions from me then became like, how does this look in my life? Because I also wanted to be a mom, but I could feel this like calling to something
Mm.
that was bigger than me and bigger than just my context, but never knowing what that's going to look like, right? And so, having developed in spiritual kind of practice, for me there was a clear calling, but I also was afraid of leadership and was afraid. And so I ran early. Started my running, really early on, um, because I could feel the responsibility, but I didn't have a specific container to hold that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's ways that that's beautiful, wonderful, because you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, it doesn't matter what you do or what you are called to do across the world. You have to be able at the darkest moment know without a doubt that that's what you're called to do, and that's who that's your connection to the divine. And so I feel like having that kind of wandering experience where it's like I couldn't find home or I couldn't find, but I'm doing these things that are constantly putting, the divine is constantly putting me in positions of influence, leadership, fill in the blank, just doing the spiritual work, doing the healing work with community and all types of community. It never was just a spiritual community. I've worked in the prison and stuff like that. And so for me, there was this understanding that I came from a lineage because my mother's energy was very similar. No matter where she would go, no matter what she would do, there's this calling, there's this thing, right? There's this thing that we do that happens. And so I spent a lot of time contending with, I don't necessarily have a title. I don't necessarily have a fill in the blank, all the things. But never at the expense of doing and showing up for the work when the door opened. Right. So it's like showing up for that were some serious training wheels.
Can you say something, I mean, if you want to, about what did the calling feel like? Like even before perhaps you had, words for that container, what did it feel like, or how did it manifest itself?
Yeah, in inhabiting that experience it feels like if it feels like a knowing that doesn't have words. It feels electric when the intersection of like divine timing and opportunities come together. It just feels solid. It doesn't live in questions. It doesn't live in that like it doesn't live in the energy of like it's about me. It's about like my mental, like understanding or knowing. It really is about being in service, and that being in service includes myself. And of that, I'm sure. There's a surety with being in relationship with your calling and your connection to the divine that I don't know. I think to me, it causes me to move different because it doesn't live in question. There's so many other areas in life that do. So for me, that's what it feels like. The texture is like to have a scene and a knowing that can't be explained. But the minute I open my mouth, so I'm one of those people, anywhere I sit, somebody will sit next to me, an entire stranger. By the end of the small amount of time we're together, I know their life story. Right? Like these things that happen, these undeniable, and also just the right relationship with like that person's, in that moment, that person's life was changed. And it had nothing to do with me, right? Like, I'm not like, oh, I'm so, I'm so perceptive. It's not that. It's spirit speaking. And so the energy and the texture of that is a knowing that feels sure is the best language I could give it. Because it doesn't, yeah. Yes.
Oh, I love that. I love that sense of certainty. As if right, it's no longer about the anxiety, right? There's something beneath that
Yeah.
that is clear.
Yes. Yes. Sometimes people ask me like, how do I, because I can navigate large groups as well as small ones. And, I'm often, don't I get nervous, or if I'm reading like my poetry or doing something with a large group, and I'm like, no, yeah. I'm like, every time my ears, they feel so hot, my nerves get a little shaky, but because I'm clear about the bigger picture. And I've seen the evidence of what it means to show up as who you are and the impact that can have to heal and change the world. That's my experience. Then it becomes less about whether I need to look like I'm not nervous or not. The work needs to be done. And so that's kind of like the energy. It's like, oh no, the work needs to be done, and it's done with consent, it's done with containers, it's done with I call it not having strings attached, because the moment we interact, whatever happens in that moment, whatever kind of priestessing, whether I'm talking to you about a herb, whether I'm talking to you about what's at the root of your bitterness or your anger, whether I'm talking about the changes of the seasons, at the end of the day, there's a direct energetic frequency that's speaking, that it is just my job to be there in the moment. And then when I walk away, I let go, because it's not my job to maintain it or to grow it or cultivate it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's like this really, and that's what I mean by that short clearness,
Yeah.
because it's like the boundaries are, I understand where I'm at in this conversation. And so for me, priestessing looked as much as it did when I was literally, this sounds funny, but baking bread for my family and homeschooling my kids, as it did sitting with my siblings for hours, having conversations about heart and growth and et cetera, and trauma, as much as it did going to a youth intervention center and sitting down and doing a red tent with a bunch of girls on, it's like the priestessing can be a myriad of things, but the calling, even when the darkest night hit, is still there.
I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you, about, you have a way when you bring poetry. I've had the privilege of getting to be in many places and Zoom rooms where you are giving forth your poetry. And
Yeah.
there is something about that experience that feels to me like that sort of open channel, that you were talking about. I wonder if that's how it feels to you.
Yeah, it does. I'm usually playing with the frequency of whatever I'm writing for a really long time energetically. And so once, and I often describe it as like, it's like hearing the wind coming, and it starts slowly, the whisper starts slowly. But when it increases and I can hear it, just like it's so clear, that's when the words come out. And once like that place reaches its like intensity, then I know, like I can feel it. Like sometimes I'll read something I wrote and I was, oh, because I could feel, right, like there's this, it's there's a channeling happening, and there's an impact happening as well that's changing things. And so I can feel when that's happening. I don't all the time, because my relationship with my poetry is one that I've had to both protect and have had challenge with. And so I try to create a little bit of, I'm going to say, a little bit of human distance from the act of writing the poem. So I'm not as aware when people are having an experience of it, what they're having is like, I'm not thinking I'm writing for you to have an experience. I'm writing because there's something I need to say that I've been listening to. And that it resonates with you, that's a bonus.
Right.
You know what I mean? That it's shifting, that's a bonus. In my mind, I'm like, wait, it reminds me of the old school prophet thing. The word of the Lord, right? Like that's I'm like getting it down, even if I have like curse words in there or whatever, I'm like, and this is this is what's coming through. This is what the texture of it, this is what it sounds and what it looks like or tastes like. And then after I'm like, oh, when people are like, oh, that was shifting. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad, like, oh.
Right. But that's already over there, right? And
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And your experience is more immediate. Am I hearing that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was such an important personal ethic and practice, because I realized early on I had the good fortune, I can say that now, when I was a kid and a teen, it didn't feel as great to be in community and kind of be singled out in not great ways because of my gifts. And so getting to this experience of enduring so much of that, and finding myself constantly at that place where feeling deeply injured by community, and not seeing that I had to make a decision, otherwise I would not be able to do the thing I'm called to do. That would have broken me more.
Yes.
So I had to learn early on, like whatever I'm doing, I'm going to create it, I'm going to show up for it, then I'm going to let it go, because I can't depend on that to give me definition. Whether I'm doing a poem or a circle or teaching a class, it's all the same.
Mhm.
The minute it comes out, I'm like, okay, I'm out. I'm like, I'm out because it's too it feels dangerous to be so linked in that way.
Mhm. Mhm. The yeah, the mystics talk about that,
Mhm.
the risk of being in that flow. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I think that that's the distinction or the nuance when you're called into priestessing work and when you're called into this like this very prismatic expression of human work, because before I have a responsibility to you and how something impacts you, before I have that, I have a responsibility to the Holy One.
Mm.
I
Mm.
you're not in that conversation. I'm like, you are not in that conversation. I have to give an account if I swallow my words. I have to give an account if I don't speak the thing that's coming. Nobody's there with me. It's me. And because it's me, I'm like, mm-mm. So yeah, so that's how like poetry for me,
Mm.
I'm just like, I'm just telling the truth of my experience, or the other piece of that, when it starts channeling into like deep rooted things, for me, that comes as if it was one of those things where this is what needs to be talked about. This is what needs to be said. We need to energetically use words as a way of opening that up and bringing balm to the wound.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Tell me about what Kohenet means for you. You chose to claim this particular Jewish lineage. Like you spoke early on about how you were priestessing in some way before you had that language. Is there anything different about having a language now?
Yes. In a big way, at least for me. Um, what the places that Kohenet to me is so powerful in its texture is that it taps into something ancient, something earth-based, indigenous, and it's a lineage that I feel like there's always an outer lens that people see things through. And then there's the internal actually workings of a thing. And I feel like on the outside, yes, Jewish feminists thought that we have to do this thing and all of the things. But underneath that, there is this very clear role around showing up in the liminal, in between the worlds. And so for me, it took me a long time to get to any place where I was like, I'm going to do a leadership training, because I've taught leadership classes and I've done some. And then I'm like, I do not want I'm like, if the medicine ain't coming back to the earth, I'm good. I've already tried things. And so when Kohenet came along, for me, it was the expression of an earth-based Judaism, which is the way for me to connect to my roots, must be that through that portal. And having when I was a young mother, I got pregnant at 16, and I had ideas about the type of woman that I wanted to be. And because I grew up with a very ambitious, go-getting, conquer any obstacle in her way type of person, my mom was just hungry in that way. I didn't want to, this is going to sound so sacrilegious, but it's true. I did not want to subscribe to the feminist that I saw in the world. And even in the generation of my mom, I'm like, I am not going to go to, I gotta go get some career if, I have children at home. And I was like, I don't want to live in that tension. This is the type of person that I want to be. This is the type of mom that I want to be. I had a lot of fantastic ideas. They sounded so sexy. I was so young. I was so cute. I was so cute. I thought I knew what I was saying. One night, one insomniac night, 3 a.m. in the morning, and I was watching something. It was like a documentary on PBS, and it was talking about women's plight. And I don't know what happened in that moment, and I can't recall exactly how old I was. I already had my son. There was something about that moment that caused me to realize that I owe it to every woman before me in my lineage to assume my place. And that there was it's hard to say this without not crying. There was something that I owed to what they shed so that I could be here today and allow myself to be a woman in leadership. And that the trick here was that I could do priestessing work in a way that showed up in my life, that can grow with me and be with me. And it didn't have to be boxed in, right? By some sort of like, I needed to be this particular way. It was like, oh. And so when that moment came, that I decided, let me allow myself to be open to this. It literally happened. I think it was like a Rosh Hashanah, and I was in the basement of my house, and I was having an entirely becoming undone moment. I was like on the floor, snotty, all the things. And I was like, I surrender and I won't run anymore. And I will heed what you're calling me to. And that whole moment turned into the next day I got an email and a friend sent me the link to Kohenet.
Wow.
And I looked at the website and I went through and I was like, I could feel it. And once I know it in that way, I don't have questions. So for me, it was about assuming in my lineage where we never had and I think I said this to you when we went through I think it was our Sova initiation. And I didn't have, which is the thing I longed for, I didn't have the elder in my family to pass on the baton. I didn't have I didn't have those things. I didn't have the traditions that got passed down. Assimilation sucked the life out of that. And so to be here at this portal of recognizing that I get to do something, my mother didn't get to do it. My grandmother didn't get to do it. My great grandmother didn't either. Right. And so I was like, oh, okay, let me take my rightful place in my family and in my lineage and show up, because that is correct and right for me. And so that's how, for me, the container of like being a Kohenet and being a priestess, because literally the work we do as Kohanot, here, we're all so diverse and we're also different in what we bring to the table, because each one of those pieces matters. But it's a very, I'm going to use the word evolutionary thing. Who in the Batmobile is walking around with, a talit doing making circles on the earth, and it's 2023, and yet that frequency of connecting back to the earth and back to those roots and back to those places, for me, was the gold, was the beauty. Yeah.
I remember that moment of your saying, this is what my elders would have wanted to do for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I cried. Cried so much. I was like, my Kohenet training, I spent it so much. There was so much crying happening for me. But because there's a piece of me that was running, right, from this assignment, and the running is a luxury, right? And realizing that I did no one any service running, especially the work that my ancestors did before so that I could get here, right? And so it's less about like the prize of having a title, and it's more about, I'm so sorry that I had the arrogance. I will assume my position, you know, with just like deep gratitude. So that's what that for me was. And because the sound of between the learning of the Torah and, you know, I always say this, like, this is what I love about our work, is that there's the beauty of connecting to, let's think about this, let's chew on it in all the ways and in all the dimensions, but let's also embody it and inhabit it. It's not distant. And so that for me was, I was like, okay, Samuel.
So amazing to be with you in this work, you know, in the ways we get to learn from one another. You know, I was thinking as you were speaking about, you know, you also do a lot of work that's specifically around liberation, right? Around self-liberation, around communal liberation.
Yeah.
You know, and the story that you're telling of how you claimed your place, it feels like a version of that liberation. Right? So I wondered if you would say something about that piece of your path and your work.
Yeah. Yeah. There was this deep desire for unification. I was hungry for that. Hungry for there's I love the idea of transcendence or transcending something. I'm all about the idea of turning pain into power. But what I did not want to do, I didn't want shortcuts in that. I wanted to show up to go through the process and do the work of that. And that meant contending with what we use in modern language now is like contending with the witch wound, contending with being leaders in any like version of community that showed up, being leaders within that, but almost unrecognized, right? And so there was this way that I could feel the pressure of like the pressure for definition, while simultaneously that was the least of what I was seeking, and I was seeking more the unified experience. And for me, so much of the work that I've done, because I've had to show up for it, even when I didn't want to face it, even when it was hard, I had to look it in the face and like wrestle with it. For me, liberation, there was so much of this human experience that has come down to a couple of fundamental things. And one of those things is that the thing I was seeking to be free from was the things that I had internalized. I was fighting, I was at war internally. And it wasn't because I had this, you know, unrest. It was because I had taken in too much of the outside identity that the world or the conditioning demands, right? And that for me, there was this like, I want to be free. I want to experience the peace of knowing that whether it's been amazing or absolutely horrible, I was fully myself. That I could be fully myself with myself.
Yes.
Right. And so I feel like so much of the liberation work that I do is based on doing this liberatory work that is layered. It's personal, interpersonal, communal. And I use this in a lot of my trainings because I believe in our capacity to hold the multidimensional inhabitation of what it means to be human and that we've been conditioned out of. So much of my work is like, no, wait a minute, before we try to go, you want to save the world? I'm so happy for you. I'm glad. I'm like, yes, wonderful. Great idea. Having said that, before you go save the world, do you know where you're imprisoned? Because you will only create after its own kind. right? And so I'm like, wait, let's talk about you for a minute. Let's cause remembering. Let's put you back together. Are you connected? We talk about self-love, we talk about all of those things, but it's not just loving oneself and having regard for oneself. It's also the capacity to accept oneself in all of our humanity. And if I can't do that, if you can't do that, what gift can we give anybody else? So much of my like, I do not have any specific training, whatever that means, other than my Kohenet stuff, because I knew that my work had to operate outside of what's been normative in order to actually deconstruct the thing from the inside to support, and so much of my work now, or even all of my stuff now, like these years that I've been doing this work, is a direct result of personal experience, communal experience, being there in the fight of that thing. So I feel like liberation for me is not just this idea of the normative political ideology, because of people that are not free inside, what the fuck would they do with freedom outside? Right? Like, you will imprison others in the way that you're imprisoned. And so I was, for me early on, I was like, oh, we're not doing that. Like the Einstein quote I use in all my like anti-racism training is like, Einstein said, you can't do the same thing over and expect different results. And the mind that created the problem can't be the mind that solves the problem. And I feel like that's been the underneath praxis around my like liberatory perspective. The thing that I had to learn much more deeply is that it is so messy. Liberation is messy.
Yeah.
So messy. So yeah, for me, a lot of that, like the liberatory that it's sowing the seeds of the world to come that is already present, all the things. But if we can't access that internally, we're in trouble. So
it feels so relevant now. How much what's inside us affects how we both perceive and act, in relationship to the outside.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I find that this is sometimes I find some things fascinating because I take for granted my own movement, or like, like my how I've been just moving in the world and the way I think. And I'm often surprised that people do not actually realize in the process of whatever they're perceiving as expression. Whatever they're perceiving as expression, that you're telling on yourself. You're telling on your own pain. You're telling on your own insecurity. I mean, I'm like, thank you for letting me know. It's good to have a heads up, right? I'm like, it's great to have a heads up. Memo, right? Like, it's one of those things. I'm like, okay. But it's indicative of your own relationship with stuff. Right? And I feel like that I know when there's a lack of ferocity and compassion because the person can't hold that. Nonetheless, they can offer it. Right? And you hear it come out, and I'm like, all right, listen, you're going to discover for the rest of your life until your last breath contradictions and complexities for days, centuries. How about that? Right? I'm like, and if you can't figure out by now that you're going to need a whole bunch of compassion, and you can still be fierce, you're going to miss it. You're just going to be raging. And there's a place for that, but you can't stay there. So yeah.
I'm feeling a lot of relief from your words, because I'm really hearing the depth, with which you are thinking about this, and I feel like depth is so much what's called for. I mean, all the time.
Yeah.
But somehow, as we get deeper and deeper into this age, it feels more called for.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your work with plants because we've never really gotten to talk about it. And I was just thinking, with all of the work that you do with us human beings and our frustrations, I wonder if maybe sometimes you prefer the plants. So I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, by far, there is a easiness with that relationship that is not experienced with humans. Um, yeah, I feel like I can't imagine even being like a word person, and I love reading, I love stuff, all the things. But I feel like which is in my astrological chart all over the place, my connection to the earth and my connection to the physical medicine is something that I've always just felt deeply synergistic with, even as a kid. Um, like the tending of that work is something that was always powerful for me, to observe, and also just such an expression of the divine spark in terms of like beauty and all the ways that it shows up. And so the older I got, the more interested I was in like, what does it look like to nourish the body while we're doing all this shifting? And I'm like coaching and I'm teaching, I'm doing all these things, but there are these pieces for me are missing from the conversation, because we need more support than just the words, right? And so for me, there's this bless my family, my children, bless their hearts. I'm sure they're still recovering from all my explorations with herbs and things like that. Forcing them to drink teas that don't taste great. It does not taste like juice. And, doing like having this way of like, my passion around it was, there's this literally, like I'm looking at a plant and I'm like, this living thing is in relationship to the world around me, supports me. um and I was talking about this recently around like uh extractive energy or energy leaks and things like that, and how to close. And I'm like, you use plant medicine but you've never dug into the ground. It's a misaligned relationship. You eat food, you eat vegetables, but did you ever go thank the tree? I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And so for me, plants, I just really appreciate that they are all about frequency.
Mm.
There's something about working with that that doesn't require words. It's much more of a physical, energetic, intuitive relationship that I'm listening into. And so I love making tea blends, and I love making, I love making salves or sprays, and thinking about the magical alignment. And for me, it doesn't like, I know that we speak in this like topical separation because we're so evolved, apparently, everything's in a category, but it's medicine.
Mhm.
And for me, there's this, what's, if my heart is broken, what's the medicine?
Mhm.
The medicine is not just affirmations. The medicine is also the relationship to this plant that's available to support me in that. It has something to teach me.
Yes.
Also, in my family lineage, we're farmers, we're growers, we're earth tenders, right? So it's like, I'm just coming home.
Mm. Mm.
I'm no longer asking, how do I know how to tend a plant? I didn't read a book. It's a relationship.
Mhm.
And we're tight like that. We're BFFs for life. It's like, this is like, and it feels that way. And so when I think about even the work that I do, I'm thinking about things like, I think about dandelion along with so many other folks. I think about mycelium. I think about all the ways that they're teachers for us. The way oat straw is, if you're not a cannabis person, it's a good runner up for the way that it brings and regulates the nervous system, right? And so for me, it's like, there's all this support. There's all this support, and my ear is open. And it's always been like that. So I love making medicine is one of my favorite things to do, because I know that it is a physical, tangible thing in this dimension that you can be in relationship with, that has all the senses involved.
I love that we're coming back to the way that you're open to be listening, to be perceiving. Feels like, you know, a through thread.
Yeah.
How can people learn more about your work? What's a good way for people to connect with your wisdom?
Yeah, so I have a website, priestessingliberation.com. So that's definitely a place where you can find out the threads. You can also find me at social media on the same thing, Priestessing Liberation. And if you want to draw in closer, Substack is a good place to kind of draw in. I've been on there for a little bit and still working out how to like show up in that container, but I get to share so much of like my poetry when it comes up and things like that, and also like liberatory stuff. So you can find me at the website, or you can find me no matter where you find me, it's Priestessing Liberation. So that's the good part. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
It's going to say amen to that.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for the opportunities that we have to create connections that transcend this lifetime. And also this idea of, the other day I cornily said, because I'm there, so many things sound corny when they're coming out. And I was like, you start to realize how deep the roots of the words for a time such as this. And I feel like that's what our Kohenet movement is. That's what these moments in our lives that we actually get to connect and we get to be part of what it means to continue to grow generation by generation, and also evolve the way medicine looks coming from different cultures and communities. And so I'm so grateful for your choice in showing up, because this is what we need. We need people to show up as they're showing up for their work in the world, in their lives, and in all the things, so that when we intersect each other, we're lit up by that. And the light does continue to grow. Right. And that to me is the holiest thing any of us could ever be a part of, is causing the light to grow. Right. And so it becomes less and less about like, it becomes less and less about like, to whom do you belong, and more about the radical commitment to be light in these ways. And it's so individually expressed in each and every one of us. And this is why I'm passionate about doing the work that I do with folks, right? Like that, the priestessing is because we don't need to be each other. I don't need you to be me. I don't need to be you. I need to be fully in who I am. And I feel like there's such a beauty in that. And that's why, to me, our work is so important, because we cause a remembering that is revolutionizing the future. So thank you.
Thank you. It has been a joy to speak to you. It always is. And I'm I'm so excited to get to share some of your poetry, wisdom, and connection with others. Thank you for joining us in the Mystics Room.
Yes, thank you, and have a wonderful day. And I look forward to connecting with folks as they come through.